Okay, I'm live now. Um, so I'm sorry about that. It got interrupted and it broke down. I have been using. Oh, I'm live. Hi everyone. So we're back for take two on starting Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. I was using a third-party streaming software because my camera does this stupid auto-focusing thing that I don't know how to turn off in normal situations. So you're stuck with that and 480p quality. Sorry. Anyway, let's get back to this. And hopefully the weird auto adjust thing doesn't bother you. I'm sorry. Um, a Cyborg Manifesto. Science, Technology, and Socialist Feminism in the Late 20th Century. God, that's gonna bother the shit out of me. Oh, it's so blurry. An ironic dream of a common language for women in the integrated circuit. In this chapter, and this chapter is an effort to build an ironic political myth faithful to feminism, socialism, and materialism. Perhaps more faithful as blasphemy is faithful than as reverent worship and identification. Blasphemy has always seemed to require taking things very seriously. I know no better stance to adopt from within the secular religious, evangelical traditions of the United States politics, including the politics of socialist feminism. Blasphemy protects one from the moral majority within, while still insisting on the need for a community. Blasphemy is not apostasy. Irony is about the contradictions that do not resolve into larger wholes, even dialectically, about the tension of holding incompatible things together because both or all are necessary and true. Irony is about humor and serious play. It is also rhetorical strategy and a political method, one I would like to see more honored within socialist feminism. At the center of my ironic faith, my blasphemy, is the image of the cyborg. A cyborg is a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Social reality is lived social relations, our most important political construction, a world-changing fiction. The international women's movements have constructed women's experience, as well as uncovered or discovered this crucial collective object. This experience is a fiction and fact of the most crucial political kind. Liberation rests on the construction of the consciousness, the imaginative apprehension of oppression, and so of possibility. The cyborg is a matter of fiction and lived experience that changes what counts as women experience in the late 20th century. This is a struggle over life and death, but the boundary between science fiction and social reality is an optical illusion. Contemporary science fiction is full of cyborgs, creatures simultaneously animal and machine, who populate worlds ambiguously natural and crafted. Modern medicine is also full of cyborgs. Pause. I'm actually kind of a cyborg. I have a titanium rod in my leg. Kinda hoping to go full bionic one day, but we'll see. Modern medicine is also full of cyborgs, of couplings between organism and machine, each conceived as coded devices, in intimacy and with a power that was not generated in the history of sexuality. Cyborg sex restores some of the lovely replicative baroque of ferns and invertebrates, such nice organic prophylactics against heterosexism. Cyborg replication is uncoupled from organic reproduction. Modern production seems like a dream of cyborg colonization work, a dream that makes the nightmare of Taylorism seem idyllic. And modern war is a cyborg orgy, coded by C cubed I, command control communication intelligence, an $84 billion item in 1984's US defense budget. I am making an argument for the cyborg as a fiction mapping our social and bodily reality as an imaginative resource suggesting some very fruitful couplings. Michel Foucault's biopolitics is a flaccid premonition of cyborg politics, a very open field. By the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is our ontology. It gives us our politics. The cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality. The two joined centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation. In traditions of Western science and politics, the tradition of racist, male-dominant capitalism, the tradition of progress, the tradition of appropriation of nature as a resource for the productions of culture, the tradition of reproduction of the self from the reflections of the other, the relation between organism and machine has been a border war. The stakes in the border war have been the territories of production, reproduction, and imagination. This chapter is an argument for pleasure in the confusion of boundaries and for responsibility in their construction. It is also an effort to contribute to socialist feminist culture and theory in a postmodernist, non-naturalist mode, and in the utopian tradition of imagining a world without gender, which is perhaps a world without genesis, but maybe also a world without end. The cyborg incarnation is outside salvation history, nor does it mark a time on the Oedipus, that guy, that dude. That dude. Wow, good going, Phoebe. Nor does it mark a time on the Oedipal calendar, attempting to heal the terrible cleavages of gender in an oral symbiotic utopia or post-Oedipal apocalypse. As Zoe Sophoulis argues in her unpublished manuscript on Jacques Lacan, Melanie Klein, and nuclear culture, Lacan, the most terrible and perhaps the most promising monsters in cyborg worlds are embodied in a non-Oedipal narratives with different logic of repression, which are needed to understand for our survival. The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. It has no truck with bisexuality, pre-Oedipal symbiosis, unalienated labor, or other seductions to organic wholeness through a final appropriation of all of the powers of the parts into a higher unity. In a sense, the cyborg has no origin story in the Western sense, a final irony since the cyborg is also the awful apocalyptic telos of the West's escalating dominations of abstract individualism, an ultimate self untied at last from all dependency, man in space. One moment. I'm sorry, I just kissed my cat before I went live. Ew. And a man in space. An origin story in Western humanist sense depends on the myth of original unity, fullness, bliss, and terror, represented by the phallic mother from all whom humans must separate, the task of individual development and of history, the twin potent myths inscribed most powerfully for us in psychoanalysis and Marxism. Hilary Klein has argued that both Marxism and psychoanalysis, in their concepts of labor and of individuation and gender formation, depend on the plot of original unity out of which difference must be produced and enlisted in a drama of escalating domination of women/nature. The cyborg skips the step of original unity, of identification with nature in the Western sense. This is its illegitimate promise that might lead to subversion of its technology as Star Wars. The cyborg is resolutely committed to partiality, irony, intimacy, and perversity. It is oppositional, utopian, and completely without innocence. No longer structured by the polarity of public and private, the cyborg divines a technological polis based partly on a revolution of social relations in the okos, the household. Nature and culture are reworked. One can no longer be the resource for appropriation or incorporation by the other. The relationships for forming wholes from parts, including those of polarity and hierarchical domination, are at issue in the cyborg world. Unlike the hopes of Frankenstein's monster, the cyborg does not expect its father to save it through a restoration of the garden, that is, through the fabrication of a heterosexual mate, though its completion in a finished whole, a city, and cosmos. Hold on one moment. That's a bit better. I hope that doesn't make it... Ew. It was just really bright. The cyborg does not dream of community on the model of the organic family, this time without the Oedipal project. The cyborg would not recognize the Garden of Eden, it is not made of mud and cannot dream returning to dust. Perhaps that is why I want to see if cyborgs can subvert the apocalypse of returning to nuclear dust and the manic compulsion to name the enemy. Cyborgs are not reverent. They do not remember the cosmos. They are wary of holism, but needy for connection. They seem to have a natural feel for united front politics, but without the vanguard party. The main trouble with cyborgs, of course, is that they are the illegitimate offspring of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, not to mention state socialism. But illegitimate offspring are often exceedingly unfaithful to their origins. Their fathers, after all, are inessential. I will return to the science fiction of cyborgs at the end of this chapter, but now I want to signal 3 crucial boundary breakdowns that make the following political-fictional, political-scientific analysis possible. By the late 20th century, in United States scientific culture, the boundary between human and animal is thoroughly breached. The last beachheads of uniqueness have been polluted, if not turned into amusement parks. Language, tool, use, social behavior, mental events, nothing really convincingly settles the separation of human and animal. And many people no longer feel the need for such a separation. Indeed, many branches of feminist culture affirm the pleasure of connection of human and other living creatures. Movements for animal rights are not irrational denials of human uniqueness. They are a clear-sighted recognition of connection across the discredited breach of nature and culture. Biology and evolutionary theory over the last 2 centuries have simultaneously produced modern organisms as objects of knowledge and reduced the line between humans and animals to a faint trace re-etched in ideological struggle or professional disputes between life and social science. Within this framework, teaching modern Christian creationism should be fought as a form of child abuse. Biological determinist ideology is only one position opened up in scientific culture for arguing the meanings of human animality. There is much room for radical political people to contest the meanings of the breached boundary. The cyborg appears in myth precisely where the boundary between human and animal is transgressed. Far from signaling a walling off of people from other living beings, cyborgs signal disturbingly and pleasurably tight coupling. Bestiality has a new status in the cycle of marriage exchange. Could have phrased that a bit better, Haraway. The second leaky distinction is between human and animal, organism and machine. Pre-cybernetic machines could be haunted. There was always the specter of the ghost in the machine. This dualism structured the dialogue between materialism and idealism that was settled by a dialectical progeny called spirit or history, according to taste. But basically, machines were not self-moving, self-designing, and autonomous. They could not achieve man's dream, only mock it. They were not man, an author to himself, but only a caricature of that masculinist reproductive dream. To think that they were otherwise was paranoid. Now we are not so sure. Late 20th century machines have made thoroughly ambiguous the difference between natural and artificial, mind and body, self-developing and externally designed, and many other distinctions that used to apply to organisms and machines. Our machines are disturbingly lively, and we ourselves frighteningly inert. Technological determination is only one ideological space opened up by the reconceptions of machine and organism as coded texts through which we engage in the play of writing and reading of the world. Textualization of everything in post-structuralist, postmodern theory has been damned by Marxists and socialist feminists for its utopian disregard for the lived relations of domination that ground the play of arbitrary reading. It is certainly true that postmodernist strategies, like my cyborg myth, subvert myriad organic wholes, for example, the poem, the primitive culture, the biological organism. In short, the certainty of what counts as nature, a source of insight and a promise of innocence, is undermined, probably fatally. The transcendent authorization of interpretation is lost, and with it the ontology grounding Western epistemology. But the alternative is not cynicism or faithlessness. That is, some version of abstract existence, like the accounts of technological determinism, destroying man by the machine, or meaningful political action by the text. Who cyborgs will be is a radical question. The answers are a matter of survival. Both chimpanzees and artifacts have politics, so why shouldn't we? The third distinction is a subset of the second. The boundary between physical and non-physical is very imprecise for us. Pop physics books on the consequences of quantum theory and the indeterminacy principle are a kind of popular scientific equivalent to Harlequin romances as a marker of radical change in American white heterosexuality. They get it wrong, but they're on the right subject. Modern machines are quintessentially microelectronic devices. They are everywhere and they are invisible. Modern machinery is an irreverent, upstart god, mocking the Father's ubiquity and spirituality. The silicon chip is a surface for writing. It is etched in molecular scales disturbed only by atomic noise, the ultimate interference for nuclear scores. Writing, power, and technology are old partners in Western stories of the origin of civilization. But miniaturization has changed our experience of the mechanism. Miniaturization has turned out to be all about power. Small is not so much beautiful as preeminently dangerous, as in cruise missiles. Contrast the TV sets of the 1950s or the news cameras of the 1970s with the TV wristbands and the and the hand-sized video cameras now advertised. Our best machines are made of sunshine. They are all light and clean because they are nothing but signals, electromagnetic waves, a section of the spectrum. And these machines are eminently portable, mobile, a matter of immense human pain in Detroit and Singapore. People are nowhere so fluid, being both material and opaque. Cyborgs are either quintessence. The ubiquity and invisibility of cyborgs is precisely why these sunshine belt machines are so deadly. They are hard to see politically as materially. They are about consciousness or its simulation. They are floating signifiers moving in pickup trucks across Europe, blocked more efficiently by the witch weavings of the displaced and so unnatural green-hand women, who read the cyborg webs of power so very well, than by the militant labor of older masculinist politics, whose natural constituency needs defense jobs. Ultimately, the hardest science is about the realm of greatest boundary confusion, the realm of pure number, pure spirit, cryptography, and the preservation of potent secrets. The new machines are so clean and light. Their engineers are sun worshippers mediating a new scientific revolution associated with the night dream of a post-industrial society. The diseases evoked by these clean machines are no more than the minuscule coding changes of an antigen in the immune system, no more than the experience of stress. The nimble fingers of Oriental women, the old fascination of little Anglo-Saxon Victorian girls with dolls' houses, women's reinforced attention to the small take on quite new dimensions in this world. There might be a cyborg Alice taking account of these new dimensions. Ironically, it might be the unnatural cyborg women making chips in Asia and spiral dancing in the Santa Rita jail whose constructed unities will guide effective oppositional strategies. So, my cyborg myth is about transgressed boundaries, potent fusions, and dangerous possibilities which progressive people might explore as one part of needed political work. One of my premises is that most American socialists and feminists see deepened dualisms of mind and body, animal and machine, idealism and materialism in the social practices, symbolic formulations, and physical artifacts associated with high technology and scientific culture. From one-dimensional man to the death of nature, the analytic resources developed by progressives have insisted on the necessary domination of technics and recalled us to an imagined organic body to integrate our resistance. Another of my premises is that the need for unity of people trying to resist worldwide intensification of domination has never been more acute. But a slightly perverse shift of perspective might better enable us to contest for meanings, as well as for other forms of power and pleasure in technologically mediated societies. From one perspective, a cyborg world is about the final imposition of a grid of control on the planet, about the final abstraction embodied in a Star Wars apocalypse waged in the name of defense, about the final appropriation of women's bodies in a masculinist orgy of war. From another perspective, a cyborg might be about lived and social might be about lived social and bodily realities in which people are not afraid of their joint kinship with animals and machines, not afraid of permanently partial identities and contradictory standpoints. The political struggle is to see from both perspectives at once because each reveals both dominations and possibilities unimaginable from the other vantage point. Single vision produces worse illusions than double vision or many-headed monsters. Oh, oh no. Am I still live? Okay. I thought I accidentally clicked the end live video button. Forgive me. The political struggle is to see from both perspectives at once because each reveals both dominations and possibilities unimaginable from the other vantage point. Single vision produces worse illusions than double vision or many-headed monsters. Cyborg unities are monstrous and illegitimate. In our present political circumstances, we could hardly hope for more potent myths for resistance and recoupling. I like to imagine LAG, L-A-G, the Livermore Action Group, is a kind of cyborg society dedicated to realistically converting the laboratories that most fiercely embody and spew out the rods, the tools of technological apocalypse, and committed to building a political form that actually manages to hold together witches, engineers, elders, perverts, Christians, mothers, and Leninists long enough to disarm the state. Fission Impossible is the name of the affinity group in my town. Affinity related not by blood but by choice, the appeal of one chemical nuclear group for another, avidity. Fractured identities. It has become difficult to name one's feminism by a single adjective, or even to insist in every circumstance upon the noun. And that's why I'm an anarchist. That's why I'm an anarcho-feminist, actually. But that's a side tangent. Consciousness of exclusion through naming is acute. Identities seem contradictory, partial, and strategic. With a hard-won recognition of their social and historical constitution, gender, race, and class cannot provide the basis for belief in essential unity. There's nothing about being female that naturally binds women. There's not even such a state as being female, itself a highly complex category constructed in contested sexual scientific discourses and other social practices. Gender, race, or class consciousness is an achievement forced on us by the terrible historical experience of contradictory social realities of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. And who counts as us in my own rhetoric? Which identities are available to ground with such potent political myth called us, and what would motivate enlistment in this collectivity? Painful fragmentation among feminists, not to mention other women, along every possible fault line has made the concept of woman elusive, an excuse for the matrix of women's dominations of each other. For me, and for many who share a similar historical location in white, professional, middle-class, female, radical North American mid-adult bodies, the sources of a crisis in political identity are legion. The recent history for much of the U.S. left and U.S. feminism has been a response to this kind of crisis by endless splitting and searches for new essential unity. But there has also been a growing recognition of another response through coalition, affinity, not identity. Kayla Sandoval, from a consideration of specific historical moments and formation of the new political voice called Women of Color, has theorized a hopeful model of political identity called Oppositional Consciousness, born of the skills for reading webs of power by those refused stable membership in the social categories of sex, race, or class. Women of color, a name contested at its origins by those whom it could incorporate, as well as historical consciousness, marking systematic breakdown of all the signs of man in Western traditions, constructs a type of postmodernist identity out of otherness, difference, and specificity. This postmodernist identity is fully political, whatever might be said about other possible postmodernisms. Sandoval's oppositional consciousness is about contradictory locations in heterochronic calendars, not about relativisms and pluralisms. Sandoval emphasizes the lack of any essential criterion for identifying who's oh boy, this is where it gets a little bit difficult for me. Sandoval emphasizes the lack of any essential criterion for identifying who is a woman of color. She notes that the definition of the group has been a conscious appropriation of negation. For example, a Chicana or a U.S. black woman has not been able to speak as a woman or as a black person or as a Chicano. Thus, she was at the bottom of a cascade of negative identities, left out of even the privileged oppressed authorial categories called women and blacks, who claimed to make the most important revolutions. The category woman negated all non-white women, black negated all non-black people as well as all black women. But there was also no she, no singularity, but a sea of differences among U.S. women who have affirmed their historical identity as U.S. women of color. This identity marks out a self-consciously constructed space that cannot affirm the capacity to act on the basis of natural identification, but only on the basis of conscious coalition, of affinity, of political kinship. Unlike the woman of some streams of the white women's movement in the United States, there's no naturalization of the matrix, or at least this is what Sandoval argues is uniquely available through the power of oppositional consciousness. Sandoval's argument has to be seen as one potent formulation for feminists out of worldwide development of anti-colonialist discourse. That is to say, discourse dissolving the West and its highest product. The one who is not animal, barbarian, or woman, or man, that is, the author of a cosmos called history. And as Orientalism is deconstructed politically and semiotically, the identities of the Occident destabilize, including those of feminists. Sandoval argues that women of color have a chance to build an effective unity that does not replicate the imperializing, totalizing revolutionary subjects of previous Marxisms and feminisms which had not yet faced the consequences of disorderly polyphony. God, I did audio science. I should be able to pronounce that. Emerging from decolonization. Katie King has emphasized the limits of identification and the political, poetic mechanics of identification built into reading the poem, the core, that generative core of cultural feminism. King criticizes the persistent tendency among contemporary feminists from different moments or conversations in feminist practice to taxonomize the women's movement to make one's own political tendencies appear to be the telos of the whole. These taxonomies tend to remake feminist history so that it appears to be an ideological struggle among coherent types persisting over time, especially those typical units called radical, liberal, socialist feminism. Literally all other feminisms are either incorporated or marginalized, usually by building an explicit ontology and epistemology. Taxonomies of feminism produce epistemologies to police deviation from official women's experience. And, of course, women's culture, like women of color, is consciously created by mechanisms inducing affinity. The rituals of poetry, music, and certain forms of academic practice have been preeminent. The politics of race and culture in the U.S. women's movements are intimately interwoven. The common achievement of King and Sandoval is learning how to craft a poetic/political unity without relying on a logic of appropriation, incorporation, and taxonomic identification. One moment. I have the air conditioning off. I'm hot. There we go. Okay. Yeah, November in North Carolina is still hot. The theoretical and practical struggle against unity through domination or unity through incorporation, ironically, not only undermines the justifications for patriarchy, colonialism, humanism, positivism, essentialism, scientism, and other unlamented isms, but all claims for an organic or natural standpoint. I think that radical and socialist/Marxist feminisms have also undermined our own epistemological epistemological strategies, and that is this crucially valuable step in imagining possible unities. Remains to be seen whether all epistemologies, as Western political people have known them, fail us in the task to build effective affinities. It is important to note that the effort to construct revolutionary standpoints, epistemologies as achievements of people committed to changing the world has been part of the process of showing the limits of identification. These acid tools of postmodern theory and the constructive tools of ontological discourse about revolutionary subjects might be seen as ironic allies in dissolving with the Western selves in the interests of survival. We are excruciatingly conscious of what it means to have a historically constituted body. But with the loss of innocence in our origin, there is no expulsion from the garden either. Our politics lose the indulgence of guilt with the naivete of innocence. But what would another political myth for socialist feminism look like? What kind of politics could embrace partial, contradictory, permanently unclosed constructions of personal and collective selves and still be faithful, effective, and, ironically, socialist feminist? I do not know of any other time in history when there was a greater need for political unity to confront effectively the dominations of race, gender, sexuality, and class. I also do not know of any other time when the kind of unity we might help build could have been possible. None of us have any longer the symbolic or material capability of dictating the shape of reality to any of them, or at least we cannot claim innocence from practicing such dominations. White women, including socialist feminists, discovered, that is, we were forced kicking and screaming to notice, the non-innocence of the category woman. That consciousness changes the geography of all previous categories. It denatures them as heat denatures a fragile protein. Cyborg feminists have to argue that we do not want any more natural matrix of unity, that no construction is whole. Innocence and the corollary insistence on victimhood as the only ground for insight has done enough damage. But the constructed revolutionary subject must give late 20th century people pause as well. In the fraying of identities and in the reflective strategies of constructing them, The possibility opens for weaving something other than a shroud for the day after the apocalypse, and so that prophetically ends salvation's history. Both Marxist/socialist feminisms and radical feminisms have simultaneously naturalized and denatured the category of woman in consciousness of social lives of women. Perhaps a schematic caricature can highlight both kinds of moves. Marxian socialism is rooted in an analysis of wage labor which reveals class structure. The consequences of the wage relationship is systematic alienation, as the worker is dissociated from his product. Oh, cat! No, no, oh, no! Bye, bye, kitty. Bye. Sorry about that. Augustus. Silly kitty. Where was I? Abstraction and illusion rule in knowledge, and domination rules in practice. Labor is the preeminently privileged category, enabling the Marxists to overcome illusion and to find that point of view which is necessary for changing the world. Labor is the humanizing activity that makes man. Labor is an ontological category permitting the knowledge of subject, and so the knowledge of subjugation and alienation. In faithful fellation, socialist feminism advanced by allying itself with the basic analytic strategies of Marxism. The main achievement of both Marxist feminists and socialist feminists was to expand the category of labor to accommodate what some women did, even when the wage relation was subordinated to a more comprehensive view of labor under capitalist patriarchy. In particular, women's labor in the household and women's activity as mothers generally, that is, reproduction in the socialist feminist sense, entered theory on the authority of analogy in the Marxian concept of labor. The unity of women here rests on the epistemology based on the ontological structure of labor. Marxist/socialist feminism does not naturalize unity. It is a possible achievement based on a possible standpoint rooted in social relations. The essentializing move is in the ontological structure of labor or of its analog, women's activity. The inheritance of Marxian humanism with its preeminently Western self is the difficulty for me. The contribution from these formulations has been the emphasis on daily responsibility of real women to build unities rather than to naturalize them. Catherine MacKinnon's version of radical feminism is itself a caricature of the appropriating, incorporating, totalizing tendencies of Western theory of identity grounding action. It is factually and politically wrong to assimilate all of the diverse moments or conversations in recent women's politics named radical feminisms to MacKinnon's version, but the teleological logic of her theory shows how an epistemology and ontology, including their negations, erase or police difference. Only one of the effects of MacKinnon's theory is the rewriting. That's one of my trouble words, rewriting. The rewriting of history of the polymorphous field called radical feminism. The major effect is the production of a theory of experience, of women's identity, and that is a kind of apocalypse for all revolutionary standpoints. That is, the totalization built into this tale of radical feminism achieves its end, the unity of women, by enforcing the experience of and testimony to radical non-being. As for the Marxist/socialist feminist, consciousness is an achievement, not a natural fact. And MacKinnon's theory eliminates some of the difficulties built into humanist revolutionary subjects, but at the cost of radical reductionism. MacKinnon argues that feminism is necessarily adopted into a different analytical strategy from Marxism, looking not first at the structure of class, but at the structure of sex/gender and its generative relationship, men's constitution, and the appropriation of women sexually. Ironically, MacKinnon's ontology constructs a non-subject, a non-being. Another's desire, not the self's labor, is the origin of woman. She therefore develops a theory of consciousness that enforces what can count as women's experience. Anything that names sexual violation indeed, and sex itself as far as woman can be concerned. Feminist practice is the construction of this form of consciousness, that is, the self-knowledge of a self who is not. Perversely, sexual appropriation in this feminism still has the epistemological status of labor, that is to say, from the point of view of which an analysis is able to contribute to changing the world must flow. But sexual objectification, not alienation, is the consequence of the structure of sex/gender. In the realm of knowledge, the result of sexual objectification is illusion and abstraction. However, a woman is not simply alienated from her product, but in a deep sense does not exist as a subject, or even a potential subject, since she owes her existence as a woman to sexual appropriation. To be constituted by another's desire is not the same thing as to be alienated in the violent separation of laborer from his product. McKinnon's radical theory of experience is totalizing in the extreme. It does not so much marginalize as obliterate the authority of any other woman's political speech and action. It is a totalization producing what Western patriarchy itself never succeeded in doing, feminist consciousness of the non-existence of woman, except as products of men's desire. I think McKinnon correctly argues that no Marxian version of identity can firmly ground women's unity. But in solving that problem of the contradictions of any Western revolutionary subject for feminist purposes, she develops an even more authoritarian doctrine of experience. If my complaint about socialist/Marxian standpoints and is their unintended erasure polyvocal, unassimilable, radical difference made visible in anti-colonial discourse and practice, McKinnon's intentional erasure of all difference through the device of essential non-existence of women is not reassuring. In my taxonomy, which, like any other taxonomy, is a reinscription of history, radical feminism can accommodate all of the activities of women named by socialist feminists as forms of labor only if the activity can somehow be sexualized. Reproduction had different tones of meaning for two tendencies, one rooted in labor, one in sex, both calling the consequences of domination and ignorance of social and personal reality false consciousness. Beyond either the difficulties or the contributions in the argument of any one author, neither Marxist nor radical feminist points of view have tended to embrace the status of a partial explanation. Both were regularly constituted as totalities. Western explanation has demanded as such. How could the Western author incorporate its others? Each tried to annex the other forms of domination by expanding its basic categories through analogy, simple listing, or addition. Embarrassed silence about race among white radical and socialist feminists was one major, devastating political consequence. History and polyvocality disappear into political taxonomies that try to establish genealogies. There was no structural room for race or for much else, and a theory claiming to reveal the construction of the category woman and social group woman as a unified or totalizable whole. The structure of my caricature looks like this. Socialist feminism, structure of class, wage labor, alienation of labor, by analogy, reproduction. I hope you can read that. That's your caricature. In another context, the French theorist Julia Kristeva claimed women appeared as a historical group after the Second World War, along with groups like youth. Her dates are doubtful, but we are now accustomed to remembering that as objects of knowledge and historical actors, race did not always exist, class had a historical genesis, and homosexuals are quite junior. It is no accident that the symbolic system of the family of man, and so the essence of woman, breaks up at the same moment that networks of connection among people on the planet are unprecedentedly multiple, pregnant, and complex. Advanced capitalism is inadequate to convey the structure of this historical moment. In the Western sense, the end of man is at stake. It is no accident that women disintegrates into women in our time. Perhaps socialist feminists were not substantially guilty of producing essentialist theory that suppressed women's particularity and contradictory interests. I think we have been, at least through unreflective participation in the logics, languages, and practices of white humanism and through searching for a single ground of domination to secure our revolutionary voice. Now we have less excuse. But in the consciousness of our failures, we risk lapsing into boundless difference and giving up on the confusing task of making partial real connection. Some differences are playful, some are poles of world historical systems of domination. Epistemology, that word, is about knowing the difference. And I think actually I'm about halfway through. So the way this book is typeset, the text is pretty tiny. So I think actually I may put this into a two-parter. I may continue this at a later date. No, I'll continue this at a later date. I'll make it a two-part. But yeah, no, I'm hot and I'm tired. It's been a really long week. I'm sure it's been a pretty long week for all of you guys, especially those who are in university. We're currently in finals right now. But yeah. Thank you for joining me on the special edition of Phoebe's Cozy Corner. Happy birthday, philbook. You are all my weird book digital intelligentsia family. I appreciate your tolerance for my via shenanigans immensely. I will probably back this up to YouTube either tonight or tomorrow. Depends on how exhausted I am. Anyway, thank you so much. Stay safe, stay sane, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the sign off. Signing off from your cyborg feminist signing off. Fuck. My god, I don't know why it's so bad today. Signing off from your cyborg feminist philosophical doomer GF. Ending live video now. Am I dead? Am I gone?